Hey guys, welcome back to the Fontana podcast, and today we're going to talk about that sweet science of the art of tempo running. And I know I've done a blog on this, I've written about it, I've got a written version on www.fontanafit.co.uk/blog. Give me some web traffic, that would be awesome. But the audio version, I want to give you more content, I want to give you more stories and cool stories behind the reason of, the art of tempo running and why I started to take it very seriously about heart rate and tempo running and not pace and tempo running. And what I mean by that is a lot of people talk about their tempo run when, you finish a training session, you go, oh, my tempo run was at 5-minute mile pace or 5:30 mile pace or 6-minute mile pace, whatever your tempo, you go, I was at a certain pace. But really, tempo running isn't about pace, it's about the heart rate zone that you're to be in. And you only really get that through a VO2 max or a sub VO2 max testing. But I'll get onto that later. What I want to do is talk to you about when did it start and why I became so sort of passionate about adding threshold running into my training at least once a week, especially in the off season, and then maybe once every 2 weeks coming into the track season in the summertime. So it was probably around 2012 I decided I was going to go down to London and train with the St Mary's team and Craig Winrow, Ross Murray, Charlie Grice, all these top athletes, because at that time I wasn't that good actually in Scotland, and I reached out to Craig Winrow and he didn't get back to me for about 2-3 weeks, and I emailed him again saying, look, give me a chance, my training and races don't match each other. I feel like I train way better than I race. Just give me a chance, give me a trial and see how I go with the guys. And, lo and behold, he let me come down, trained well with the team. They were pushing me, I was pushing them, and it was really, really good. But before that, in Scotland, around about 2012 and earlier, I feel that there wasn't a lot of emphasis on tempo running back in the day. It was more track sessions, i.e. 800 metre pace track sessions, 1500 metre pace track sessions, 3k pace track sessions, 5k and 10k pace. A lot of Scottish coaches and a lot of Scottish athletes from 2012 and earlier, majority were mostly doing track sessions or road sessions, but it was all round pace and it wasn't round threshold and tempo running. And that, I might be wrong there, but that was just my perception, and that was me being around 20 to 21 years old at that time as well. All I could see was athletes and coaches always doing specific paced sessions and never going, put the heart rate monitor on, we're going to be doing 6 miles at, threshold pace. So that was where I had a massive learning curve going down to London. It was, every single week there was a tempo run, and way before that, I the way I get introduced to tempo running was by one of my friends and former teammate, Chris Mackay. And basically, it was before I was moving down to London, and I was wanting to get really, really fit, and I was wanting to get, fast and strong. And Chris says to me, start tempo running. And he didn't talk to me about the science. He just said, run hard, but don't run too hard. It's not supposed to be race pace, but it's supposed to be quite hard. So me being me, I say, right, I'm going to do 2 times 2 miles. And I go out and I do my first 2 miles. And I think my first mile was like 4:45, and then my next mile was 5:25. And I need to take 6 or 8 minutes recovery because I just done a ball busting 2 mile rep. And then I go and do another 2 mile rep and say 5:15 and 5:25, and I'm like, Jesus, this is hard as balls. And I think that we just didn't have quite a grasp on what actually tempo running was, or I didn't have a grasp on what tempo running was at the time. And this is back in 2012, so this is 8-9 years ago. So I can definitely vouch that the athletes that I knew back then and the coaches that I knew back then did not adopt a threshold running approach to training. And as I went down to London, that completely changed. I had a slight, with the sort of me coaching myself before I went down to London and getting coached by Craig Winrow. I had a slight idea, it was supposed to be tough, but, I just didn't know how tough because I was just going basically balls to the wall each time for as long as I can and as hard as I can. And then, get down to London, start training with the guys, and, you know, lo and behold, I'm constantly running tempo runs too hard. And, you know, I'm always trying to beat my previous time. I think we're all guilty of that as well, aren't we? You know, if we do 5 miles in, say, you know, 5:30 pace, and we go out the next week and we've got 5 miles again at threshold, we then want to be maybe 5:27s or 5:25s. And if we don't get to that point, we feel really upset and we beat ourselves up. But again, I'm going to go back to this on and on and on, is tempo running is not about pace. It's about heart rate. So there may be days where when you go out and do a tempo run, if you do it properly, there may be days where you're sitting at, you know, 5:20 pace, but then other days you might be sitting at 5:32 pace. But what the absolute has to be is the heart rate zone, because what the heart rate's telling you is either that you're tired, so this is where you should be running in a certain physiological capacity for where you need to be at each time you do a threshold run. It's not about pace. So in 2013, 2014, I kind of I got a taste of it, but I didn't really take it too seriously, because I thought, you know, you were a soft athlete because you were running to heart rate and you weren't, you know, getting after it every single training session. But, you know, week on week, month by month, I started to, you know, learn that maybe I was going too hard. And then what really brought it home was me going for a physiology test, so going for a VO2 max and a sub VO2 max test. And those results showed me that I was training in my tempo zone too fast and too hard. And I'll get back to that in a second. But in 2013 and 2014, when I started introducing tempo running, threshold running into my training, in 2013 and 2014, I won back-to-back 5k national championships. Before that, I could not even make a national championship final. I couldn't even get out the heat in a 1500. I wouldn't even feature at all in a 5k, whether it was on the road or whether it was a district race or whatever it was. And, you know, in 2012, previously, I was never a strong 5k athlete or a 10k athlete. And I really genuinely feel that because I started threshold running, it made me a stronger 5k and 10k athlete. So I didn't take it too seriously, but I still done it every week. I mean seriously, as in I didn't wear the heart rate monitor and I didn't stick to a certain heart rate beats per minute. But in 2015, when I actually started to take it very seriously, was I moved away from Craig Winrow and I started training with Andy Vernon. And there's a cool story, you know, but before that, you know, I would always ask, like, why Vernon? I said, Vernon, mate, why are you always wearing that heart rate monitor? Like, what are you doing? And he's like, because I need to run to my threshold heart rate. I went, right, cool. And the penny never really dropped until, you know, I saw how amazing Vernon raced, you know, from his training. So he could run at, say, you know, 5:10 or 5:05 or 5-minute mile pace on his tempo runs. Sometimes it might be 5:15. There might have been some times where he's down at like 4:45 and 4:48. It was, again, just he was basing his intensity on what his heart rate was telling him. And if it was, I think his heart rate, you know, it was quite low at the time, you know, if I say like 165 or 155, and he wouldn't ever go above that because then he knew he was actually doing a different training session. So it was when I started to see like how well he could perform in races, whereas I would run my balls off in a tempo run, but then I couldn't even do anything at competition day. I couldn't lift my intensity. I couldn't lift from training. So I decided, you know, went and get the VO2 max test done. And this is where, if you do go and get it done, there's your first little spike in blood lactate, and then there's your second spike in blood lactate, which is a lot steeper curve to the right of the graph. And that's your you know, you're basically your tempo running pace, like where you buffer and you accumulate lactic at the exact same time. On a treadmill, that will give you a desired pace. For me, that may be anywhere between 19 and 19.5 kilometres an hour. So that's anywhere between sort of like, you know, 5:05 to 5-minute mile pace. on the treadmill for only 3 minutes, remember. You're only doing 3-minute stages, so just imagine if they kept me on that treadmill at 19 kilometres an hour for 10 minutes, I bet my lactates would have been way higher, but maybe been, instead of being, I think, anywhere between like 3.5 millimoles to like 4.4 millimoles of lactate in the blood. It would have been, might have been up at 5 or 6, but remember, you're only doing 3-minute stages, so it's not as accurate as you think in terms of pace. But what you do is you link where your heart rate spiked, your blood lactate spiked, to where your heart rate is, and that for me may be 167 to 170. So but what it took to achieve that was, say, 19 kilometres or 19.5k on the treadmill. But again, that was in absolutely perfect conditions. When we go outside and we train, we don't have perfect conditions. We maybe have a hilly route, we have a windy route, maybe have a day where it's super cold or it's super hot, or we go to altitude. So again, it can't be the pace that you hang on to. It has to be the heart rate. That is why you stick to the heart rate and tempo and not the pace. So, but a cool story was, I was doing a tempo run with Vernon and the Melbourne Track Club guys in the summer of, I think it was 2014, yeah. And it was mad. There was Vernon, there was Ben St. Lawrence, it was Collis Birmingham, there's Brett Robinson, there's Ryan Gregson, and I'm just like, holy shit, this is phenomenal. Like, I feel I'm fanboying here, but guys let me join in. It was a tempo run again. Everybody ran at their own pace. They didn't care who was at front, who was at the back. All these, just as long as you ran to your threshold pace. So we did a tempo run. Can't remember how long it was, but anyway, I finish just behind Brett Robinson, but I finish in front of Ryan Gregson. And afterwards, we're cooling down and we start walking back to the house, and Gregson turns around to me and goes, "What's my personal best?" And I think back then I was probably like, 14:30 for 5k, and I think 30 minutes and 8 seconds for 10k. And I think maybe like 3:55 or 3:51 for the 1500. And Gregson, we call him Grego, said, why are you in front of me in threshold running? And I was going, don't know, felt good, just chasing everybody. And he goes, do you not know the purpose behind threshold running? And I was kind of starstruck. I was like, yeah, just go out there, run hard but not too hard. And he said, why should a 3:55 guy be in front of a 3:30 guy in a threshold run? So obviously you're running too hard. And at that point, I've always got an answer to everything, but at that point, I don't think he was meaning it in a bad way or a harsh way, but I think he was just like, look, mate, you need to understand the purpose behind the training that you're doing, and also coming into quite a big group like that, not messing up anybody else's training round about, the tempo run. So as I was stumped, I'd never had an answer for him, and I was like, well, you're right, mate, you're right, I shouldn't be in front of a 3:30 guy when I'm a 3:55 guy for 1500. So that was where it really started to hit home, where, I'm training, like up with these guys, harder than these guys, but I couldn't perform to the same level. So, 2015, that's when I took it really serious. Every tempo run, I was wearing the heart rate monitor, and I wasn't going above a certain level on my heart rate monitor, and I was sticking to the zone. In 2015 is where my season actually took off, where, in the indoor season, I became 3k national champion, and outdoor season I ran 14:06 for 5k, and I ran 29:16 for 10k in my second ever 10,000 metre race. And it's not obviously all because of me running to heart rate in threshold running, but it's trying to give people that direction and that guidance that harder isn't always better, and harder isn't always going to get you faster. Ultimately, I was running as hard as I could before 2015. I started to run easier, but easier because I was actually running within myself, but I was actually getting faster. My performances on the track and on the road were becoming better. And then the reasons, again, I'll go into the reasons behind why you should stick to heart rate and not pace, is because if you're on a hilly route and you want to stick to, say it's, you're a 6 minute mile threshold type of person and you want to stay at 6 minute mile pace. Now think about this, when you start to run up the hill at 6 minute mile pace, what happens? Your heart rate goes up. Now this becomes no longer a threshold run because you want to hang on to your pace for so long because you don't want it to hurt your ego in your Garmin or your Strava. You're on a hilly route, you're starting to climb just a little and your heart rate starts to really go up, but you don't want to back off the pace because you want to stick to the 6 minute mile pace or the 5:30 mile pace or the 5 minute mile pace. But your heart rate is now 10, 15 beats per minute above where your zone's supposed to be. So now it's not a threshold run anymore. It's now you're in actually race mode or interval mode. So that's what I'm trying to say with keeping, what you do is you back off the pace and keep to the same heart rate intensity, because that's the place where you buffer and you accumulate lactic acid at the exact same time. Again, when it's windy, are you going to keep pushing into the wind at the 6 minute mile pace or the 5:30 mile pace or the 5 minute mile pace? No, because your heart rate is going to be through the roof. So what you do is you back off and you stick to your desired heart rate zone, because then what it means is it's just going to feel as hard on a hilly route, in a windy route, in a hot route, in a cold route, or altitude. The effort stays the same because you're getting yourself into the heart rate zone, not the pace. Again, in altitude, I had a conversation. I didn't know who it was at the time, but I was actually chatting to Moen, the European half marathon and marathon record holder, I believe. And I was in Kenya in I-10 in 2014, and I was speaking to Moen, and we're talking about tempo running, heart rate running, and he was actually telling me when you're at altitude, you should run about 3 or 4 beats lower than your actual sea level heart rate threshold zone. So say, at 170, I should be running about 166 at, elevation at altitude. So, when you speak to all these, really established and top level athletes, they really do tell you the importance of sticking to a certain heart rate zone, not a specific pace. So hopefully, another wee story was when to tempo and when not to tempo. So I was out in around about 2014, 2015 with Andy Badley, Chris Thompson and Vernon. And I think it was Andy Badley stopped about 2 miles into I think maybe a 5-6 mile tempo run. And we caught him back in the cool down. Tomo and Vernon were giving him a bit of stick, because they've got that sort of, dry sense of humour and, lumping into Badley. I felt bad. I was just like, oh God, I'm not, I quietly asked him, I said, what's up, mate? And he was going, I couldn't get my heart rate up today. So what he meant by that was there's a couple of ways of when you know that you shouldn't be tempo running that day. And that is when you're so tired that you can't get your heart rate up to your threshold zone. Some people may have experienced this, some people may have not. But what happens is your legs are so tired from a lot of training, a lot of mileage, accumulative fatigue, that you can't even get your heart rate up. So that's not that you're unfit, it's just that you're so tired and your body's exhausted that you can't get your heart rate into the right zone. Do not tempo run, because you're digging yourself a hole and you're digging yourself more fatigue, which can cause the injury, burnout and illness. The next one is, so we talk about this heart rate zone. If you are, say you're perfectly healthy and your training's going well, you're not fatigued and you're knocking it out the park, you'll be sitting at a heart rate zone, and for me 170, and everything will be looking sweet. It'll be saying maybe 515 or 510s, and you're just knocking it out of the park. There may be times where you're tired and you can still get to your heart rate and it's 170, but it might say 518, 525 pace because your legs are tired from all the training that you've done. But again, the intensity stays the same. The point where your heart rate buffers and accumulates lactic acid stays the same. You don't push towards 515. Why? Because then my heart rate will go to about 175 or 177, and then that means now I'm doing a training session instead of a threshold run. So, you know, it's a really, I feel that it's a really important thing to, you know, if you are serious about your training, getting a VO2 max test done, wearing your heart rate monitor on your threshold runs and not going above that pace, because then what happens is, like I was saying with the buffer and accumulating lactic acid, you won't be able to buffer it anymore, you'll just be accumulating it, and that's what you do in a race. So you'll be putting your body into a race situation, which will be either interval training or harder than interval training, because what you're doing is one big run with no recovery, i.e., you know, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 miles of tempo running without any recovery, and you're just running as hard as you can. You're going to take a long time to recover from that, and if your body felt like it was a race, then again you're going to need to take more time to recover. More interval sessions are going to be compromised by that. So what I'm trying to say is, stick to those zones, leave the ego at the door, and I hope you found this very insightful. But sayonara, folks. Have a good one. Toodles!